So today we are going to be looking at how we can go about making lips on a self-portrait. It seems that a lot of students have a hard time when it comes to making lips just because everybody has a different shape for lips. Lips are not flat, but instead they are round. And so when it comes to adding value, it can start to be a little bit tricky on how we should be shading them and how to even draw the basic structure of the lips. So similar to the nose, the lip starts off with a circle. So I'm going to try to draw a little bit darker so it's easier for you to see, but you are going to want to make sure that this circle is pretty light when you go to draw it. The next thing you will want right underneath is two circles as well. So the nice thing about starting off all of our features with some sort of circle shape, we learned that when we start using shapes to identify the things that we see, it becomes much easier to draw them. Okay, so when we drew the nose, we started off with these three circles. When we draw lips, we start off with three circles, and that gives us the underlying structure to the features of our face. Okay, so to begin, you're going to darken the bottom of this circle, and you're just going to do a small wave out to here. Okay. Up here, we are going to do our top lip. The top lip usually has some sort of curve or some tiny point. For your practice right now, go ahead and just do a curve. Once you have this laid in, you're going to do a curve at the top of the circle. And then at the top, we are going to do the same type of curved line that we did below. And then we are going to bring it down here. Notice how I haven't actually attached my lines to each other in the corners. So there's my top lip. And then I'm going to use these two circles to inform the shape of my bottom lip. So I'm going to start at one corner. I'm not going to touch this area. So my lines are still going to be spread out. I'm going to draw my line down to here. And it's going to wrap around the side of the sphere. Same here. And then all the way up to here. Again, still not touching. So once you've used these circles then to inform just the contour outline of your shapes, you can go ahead and erase those. Okay. So here's my lips. Now, when lips are pressed together like this line is going to be your darkest value. So if you think back to a 9-step value scale or 5-step value scale, every single value scale that you look at is going to have a really dark value, and then it is going to slowly transition into as light as possible, which is going to be white, or the white of your paper. So right now we are going to imagine this area here as our absolute darkest value. Now before we get going too far, I want to just take a second because when we have, let's say our light source is coming from this direction, okay? If our light is coming from here, we might see a little bit of highlight at the top of this lip, but not a whole lot. In fact, the top of this lip is actually going to be darker than this bottom lip. This bottom lip typically stands out more from your face than this lip does. And so we are going to see more of a highlight along this lip. So to show where that highlight hits, I'm just going to put a really lightly drawn shape over top of that bottom lip. And that way when I go to apply my value, I can kind of work around some of those highlighted areas, just remembering that that's where my light is coming from. You will typically have a light source hit your lip in some region. You will not always have a light source on your top lip, okay? So that's one thing moving forward. You might want to observe some people around you and see if you can identify the light sources on their lips as they're talking or as they're working. Totally up to you. But just try to be more aware of where that light is coming from, because it will influence the value that you use. So when we go to shade your upper lip, it's also not as plump or as round as this bottom lip, but it still is rounder. So when we shade, we are going to use lines that kind of curve out from the center, okay? These lines are known as cross contour lines. They help us see the form of the shape. So we are going from something super flat, and we are starting to enter into the world of making this flat two-dimensional shape become 3D. So here's the area of my highlight, being extremely careful as I work close to that area. Okay. And then up here, I may include a little bit as well. I like to start with these lines just so that way I can get my hand into the practice of what direction my hand needs to be moving in order to shade the lips in the right way. So even just by adding those cross contour lines, that's these curved lines, I'm already starting to see that this is no longer a flat two-dimensional shape like the bottom is, but it's actually something that might be a little bit more round, okay? You may even want to consider doing this for the bottom. So I'm starting with the area that is closest to my darkest line, my darkest value here. Being very careful as I work closer to my highlight. Your cross contour lines could stretch across your lips if you want them to, so they could go all the way from up here and curve all the way down to here if you would like. Again, I'm just doing this to get into the practice of my hand moving in the correct direction. Cross contour drawing is tricky for a lot of middle school students, and it's even tricky for artists that practice often. The more that you do this before you start shading something, the more your hand knows what direction it needs to be moving in. Okay? So these are the shapes of the cross contour lines that I have used to make this two-dimensional shape turn into something that is beginning to take on a form. It is starting to look more three-dimensional. Now, in order to really make my lips look complete, I need to shade them in. So I am not going to shade any part of my lips this dark value. Instead, if I were to make just a scribble value scale over here, here's my darkest dark, and I'm going to slowly take some pressure off my pencil and let it fade into the white of the paper. When I start shading, no matter what I am shading, I am going to start in the middle of my value scale, okay? When I start in the middle of my value scale, it gives me an opportunity to erase areas that need to be lighter, it also gives me an opportunity to layer on more values on top of it. If I start too dark and I try to erase my work, it's not going to erase. In fact, it's going to leave a leftover mark on your paper, which is called scarring your paper. So up here on my lip, I'm going to start in this area. I already know that the top lip is usually darker, so I'm going to start in this area of my bigger circle that I drew. Okay, so I'm going to start with one of the darker light middle values. So I'm just going to shade this entire thing. Now I'm still being extremely aware of where my highlight is. Those who are really observant, you can still see my cross contour lines show through. And once I go to add on my next layer of value, I'm going to start shading in the direction of those cross contour lines. So right now I'm just laying down the foundation of where my values. Okay. So there's the top lip. This is just with the beginning, okay? So since I've done this darker value, I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next value. Now if my light source is hitting here and it's causing a highlight to be right along this area of my lip, then that means everywhere else around it is going to have this darker value. As mentioned earlier though, as I start layering up my values, I am now going to start shading in the direction of these cross contour lines. So when I go to apply this next dark value, I am shading in this direction. Again, if you are extremely observant, you may be noticing that I am starting all of my shading where my darkest value is. So I'm starting all that shading at my darkest line. Now there are ways that you can blend your pencil and smooth it out so that way you don't see all of these types of pencil line marks. However, I'm the kind of person that really enjoys to see all the layering and the process and the mark makings that an artist goes through in order to make a lip look three-dimensional. So if that's you, don't worry about blending, okay? If you are somebody that needs to see this smooth, I recommend doing one set of lips without blending it or without smoothing it out with a Kleenex or your finger or a Q-tip, and then do another set of lips below and try blending it with a Q-tip finger or Kleenex or something and see the difference. I personally enjoyed this one. You may have a different type of shading that you enjoy. Okay, and now moving on to the bottom lip. I'm going to start in this area by doing one of these values. So the lighter end of my middle values, okay? So the cross contours at this point are not as important as just laying in that first value. Being completely aware of where my highlight has been laid in. Okay, so there's my middle value. We're already starting to see these lips take on a whole new form, which is really, really cool. It went from something flat and two-dimensional to something that looks a little bit more 3D. These highlights look a little bit too bright to me now, and so I'm just going to go ahead and put in one of my lighter values over top of my highlight, just so that way it's not like so insanely bright that it's all I see. Down here at this bottom lip, I am now shading in the cross contour direction. And this time I'm going to shade a little bit darker than how I started. So I'm going to try my best to shade in these cross contour lines. So shading in this direction. Now, as you all are working on applying value to features of your face, you may notice that you've gotten the hang of applying value, but it may not be the right values just yet, okay? So already I'm making my bottom lip much, much darker than my top lip. In the beginning of this video, I mentioned that your top lip is going to be darker. So as I continue to build this bottom lip and give it value to create form, I may find myself going back into these cross contours and darkening some of these areas. As soon as you adjust one thing, you often will go back and adjust a lot of things surrounding it. Okay, now let's say you were to accidentally not map out where your highlights are. So I'm going to cover up my highlight here just so I can show you the approach that you might want to take. So right now your lips are just two shaded blobs. You don't really see a highlight, and without that highlight, they don't look like they have that much form. That's where your eraser comes in handy. You can take your eraser, figure out where the light is coming from, and you can just either work up and down in the cross contour direction, or you can do a nice shade across and then cross contour direction. Okay? So there's your videos, or your lips, sorry. And then right above your lips, you do have a little divot in your skin. For this area, I would work in this area of your value scale, drawing extremely light. You do not need to include any pressure on your pencil for this. Right above your lip, you're going to want to apply that same kind of value. And at first, it might look like you have a mustache, but if you draw light enough and you cover your entire face in your really light value, it's going to look a little bit more blended in and unified. So if my light is hitting this top part of my lip, I will see a pretty big highlight right up here above my lip, and I won't see much of that highlight on this side. Okay, you can still see some of that cartilage that's showing. Sometimes we are tempted to do this whole thing and then darkly shade this in, and then draw where these little divots are, and then shade outside of that, and then, oh, here's my lips. Okay, this looks a little bit too, like, it looks like you haven't had enough training yet. looks like you're figuring it out, but what we need to do is change our shading to something much softer and subtle like this, okay? Once you have in your very light value, then you can go in and you can start building up some of those other values that you might see on the opposite side of a highlighted area. So where there's a light source, you've got your highlight, and then you will typically have a shadow. Okay, so for right now, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, please comment on this video. Let me know how I can help you best, as I want to make sure that you are successful in knowing how to draw the face and the features that belong on it.